Alright, well in the final video here, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to come back to the project and we're going to implement a calculation that's going to take some of the existing measures on both the internet sales and on the reseller sales side. We're going to take the sales amount less the product cost and divide it by the sales amount to come up with a profit percent. Now that is an extremely simple way to calculate it, but we just want to demonstrate the mechanics. Now this is something we need to put as an on-the-fly calculation. You would not want to store something that involves division in the fact table. You'd want to calculate this on the fly because anytime there's a roll-up that occurs, you want to take the sum of the sales amount and the sum of the product cost to determine the percentage. So what we're going to do here in Solution Explorer for the cube itself, we're going to go to the Calculations tab. Now, right now, this is an empty screen. Now, I'm actually getting an error here that is probably an internal memory error. I've had a lot of things I've had open on my VM, so I'm actually going to close this and close bids and reopen it because, like I said, I've had a lot of things open here. I'm also going to close Excel. And I'm also going to close Management Studio because I don't need that open. And I'm going to go back and reopen bids. And in the list of recent projects, I should see my mini ADW 2008 project. And when that loads, I'm going to go to Solution Explorer and double click on the cube definition. I'm going to go over to the tab called Calculations. This is where we put on-the-fly calculations. And I get an empty area here to start putting calculations in. This actually starts with a calculation script. And I'm going to actually add two calculations in here. Now I want to be able to drag in the existing measures so I don't have to type them. Well, down the lower left I see the metadata here for both internet sales and reseller sales. I'm going to use that to drag these in to create the calculations. Now if for whatever reason you get an error here where you either don't see the measures that you can drag in from the metadata, you get some kind of error message down here, you can usually reconnect to the OLAP database to get these to refresh. So usually a reconnect will do it. Well, in the script organizer here that starts with calculate, and by the way, you actually don't want to get rid of this. This actually starts the calculation script. I want to right click in the upper left corner. I'm going to create a new calculated member. And I will call this in brackets internet gross profit percent. So that'll be the name. Now the expression, I'm going to drag in the measures. It's going to be the internet sales amount less the internet total product cost and then divided by, so I'll put this put the subtraction of the two in parentheses here, and then divided by the internet sales amount. Now I also want this, I want to format this, but this is actually going to be formatted as a percent. So in the drop down for the format string, I'll render this as a percentage. Now I want it to be part of the internet fact table, at least in concept. So for the associated measure group, I'm going to set that to internet sales. So this will appear just like any other measure, except it's going to be calculated on the fly. Now you might be saying a couple of things. You might be saying, shouldn't this be sum of internet sales amount and sum of internet product cost? Actually, no. The reason is, remember that analysis services, let me come back to the cube structure here, and expand internet sales, and take a look at any one of these measures, like the internet sales amount. If I go to the properties for that measure, it's automatically auto-summed. It's a fully additive measure. We don't sum it because the analysis services engine is going to sum it for us. Now you might also be saying, Well, suppose we want to run this for a year or for a product group. Don't we pass in parameters? No, we don't. Unlike a scalar function that you might have in T-SQL, where you might pass in parameters, this reverses the process. It picks up any slicing that the user might do at runtime through the dimension usage. So if somebody is slicing internet sales by date, or by product, or by promotion, or even by geography, it automatically picks up the context by which these measures are being sliced. That's very different than relational databases, and it's extremely powerful. Now, this is a theme that we're going to see again and again with OLAP. All right, I'll check the syntax to make sure that's fine, and I'll save this. Now, this, once again, is just a definition. I'll right-click and I'll create a second calculation, and this will be reseller, gross profit percent. And this can be the same concept. From the reseller sales, I will take the reseller sales amount and subtract from it the reseller total product cost. Oops. And then divide that by the reseller sales amount. Same concept as the first one. This will also be formatted as a percent. The associated measure group here will be the reseller sales table. So I have two calculations in here. I'm going to save this one. I'll check the syntax up here to make sure the syntax is fine, and I'll save it. Once again, we don't sum this, nor do we pass in parameters. With OLAP, the process is reversed. It'll pick up at runtime whatever dimension attribute someone is slicing these measures by. All right, now I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to also add a role in here, and then we'll rebuild this. So right now this is just a local definition. We have to reprocess or redeploy. I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to add a role. So I'll close the cube editor here, and I'll come down to roles, and I will right-click and create a new role. So in Solution Explorer, I right-clicked on roles and created a new role. I'm going to call this mountain bikes for North America. So it'll be Canada and the United States. Now this role will be one that's going to be that's just going to be a read definition. The user will not have full control of the database nor the option to process it. This will just be a read role. Then I'll go to the membership tab. Now in a normal environment I would pick specific users. The way I'm going to do this, I'm going to test just the role. I'm not going to associate it with actual people. We can actually build a role and associate it with a dummy system account without actually pointing it to an actual user, and test the role without having to log out and log in to somebody else. Well, in the membership tab, I'm going to click the add button at the bottom, and I'm going to click advanced on the select users or groups dialog, and I'm going to click find now immediately, and I'll scroll down and I'll pick one of the internal users here, like the terminal server user. Again, I'm not going to log in as this person. I just need to pick some internal account. Again, I'm going to test the role, not the account. So I'll click OK and click OK again, and I have the user. Again, in a normal environment, this would be people or user groups on the domain. Then I'll go to the data source. Now there could be multiple data sources in here, so we have to identify which data source the person has read access to. Well, we only have one here. It's the AdventureWorks Data Warehouse. Then I'll go to the cube. Well, we could have multiple cubes in here, so we need to find which cube someone can read. So I'll pick just the one only cube in here. Now, we're not doing anything with local cube access, so I don't need to set these options out here. All I need to do is indicate that the person can read from the cube. I'm going to go out to the dimension data area. Here's where analysis services really shines, and here's where it's very different than relational databases. I can define the person's access through the drop-down options here with the metadata associated with the dimensions. We're going to see just how powerful these dimensions are. Now I'm going to pick the second option. Notice how when we click the drop-down here at the top for the dimensions, we see the core dimensions, and then we see their association with the cube. For reasons that I'll explain later, I'm going to pick the second dimension, the second instance. So I will go down to geography under the cube and take OK. And then in the attribute definition, I'll go to country. Well, right now we have all the countries. I'm going to deselect all the members and pick just Canada and the United States. I'm going to pick just those two. Now, most pivot table applications will show a grand total if someone slices data by country. The question is going to be, should the grand total, once we show data for Canada and US for this role, should the grand total show just Canada and the US, or should it show all countries? Well, you would think it would be the former, that we'd only want the grand total to show Canada and the US. Believe it or not, there are some environments where the end users might be expected to see the grand total across all countries, even though they only see the data for their two countries. Well, there's an option over the Advanced tab, a very powerful option, but admittedly one that's kind of confusing. There's a checkbox down at the bottom for visual totals. The way this reads is, if we have it checked on, the grand total that any pivot table that will show will reflect just what the user sees for dimensions. That's why they call it visual totals. Arguably, this should be on by default, but it's not. So I'll check it on. Then I'll come back to the Basic tab. Well, that's the definition for geography. I'll click this drop down again, and I'll go to the product definition, again under the cube, and take OK. Well, I will go to the attribute of subcategory, because we want to build definitions at the subcategory level. So I will go to subcategory, and I'll tell you what, just to make this simple, I'll go back to category. I'll make this just plain bikes. I'm going to make it very simple. So in the attribute hierarchy, I'll go just to the category name. I'll deselect all the members, and then I'll select bikes. So this person has access to two countries and one product category. Again, I'm going to go to the Advanced tab and enable visual totals. Really, if you have it for one, you should have it for other definitions you might have. So anybody associated with this role on the geography side can only see specific countries, and that'll automatically ripple down to any ripple through to any lower levels. And on the product side, the person at the category level can only see bikes. I'll save this. Now that prompts to save other things, so I have to take OK. And I'll close this. Now in Solution Explorer it has the role, and it's simply called role. I will right-click and rename this. I'm going to give this a better name. So I'll change the base name to North America Bikes. .role. We don't want to change the extension. And I'll say yes to that. Now, I've made changes around the edges of the project. I added a role, and I added the definition of some calculations. I didn't really change any data in the cube. Therefore, I'll close this editor here and come back to Solution Explorer. I'm going to right-click on the project, and instead of reprocessing it, I'm going to take deploy. I only need to deploy these changes. Deploy is simpler. It's only going to push out definitions. It's not going to deal with any fact data or dimension data directly because I haven't changed any data. Now we'll cover this more in class, but basically a process rebuilds the OLAP database from scratch. A deploy will push out only what's changed. A deploy in this case is going to be simpler, so I'll take deploy. Now once again, I'll have to say yes to any prompts that come up. And that deploys very quickly. Now this time, instead of using Excel, I'm going to go back into the cube. With the cube definition closed, I'm going to go back into it. And I'm going to go out to the last tab. There is a very basic browser. It's not as good as Excel, but for what we want to do here, it's fine. I'm going to go out to the browser tab. In the browser tab, this is going to allow me to browse the deployed version. Well, what I want to do first is I want to test that role. Up in the toolbar, there's an option to change the user, the second icon in from the left. I'm going to take that option. Now, I don't want to sign on as a user. I want to test the role. Analysis Services allows us to do that. I'm going to click the radio button here at the bottom. So again, I picked the icon with the picture of the two faces to load the security context. I want to run under the context of the role of North American bikes. So I'll do that and take OK, and then OK. And I'm going to now drag in from the measures area, from internet sales, the internet sales amount, and I'll drag it into the main body here. Instead of being 29 million, that's 10 million. So we know something is up right off the bat. Now I'm going to drag in the internet gross profit percent. That's the calculation that runs on the fly. Well, we have a profit percent of 40%. That's pretty high. That is rolling up the sales amount and the cost to come up with the profit percent. Well, I'll expand reseller sales. I'll double click on that. And I will drag in the reseller sales amount out to the right. That's 56 million instead of the 80 million. So we know that that is being filtered. And I'll drag in the reseller gross profit percent. That's lower. On the reseller side, the costs are much higher, so there's a much lower profit percent. Notice how in the metadata here there's a little icon to indicate that those two profit percents are calculations. They're part of the internet sales and reseller sales family, but they're calculations. Well, now I'll come down to the customer dimension, or excuse me, not the customer dimension, the geography dimension, and I'll take the country, and I'll drag the country attribute into that little section, vertical section that says drop row fields here. Notice how I see just the US and Canada. And then a grand total that reflects just those two countries because I had visual totals turned on in the roles. Well, I will go down to the product dimension. I'll take the product subcategory. Remember, we had the role here for just bikes. Well, I'm going to take the subcategory, which has several bikes underneath, and I'll drag that up where it says drop column fields here. Notice I've got mountain bikes, the two measures and the 2%, road bikes, the two measures for internet sales and reseller sales and the 2%, touring bikes, and then a grand total that reflects just bikes. It's doing an awful lot here. First of all, it's recognizing the role. We didn't even have to sign on as that user. We could test the role here. And we have these calculations that are running behind the scenes, and they're picking up the context by which we're slicing the data. So once again, we do not pass in the fact that we want to run this for a time period, or for a geography, or for a product. With OLAP, the process is reversed. It picks up the context by which we're slicing the measures associated with that calculation. I can't emphasize the power here and how this differs from relational databases. So it's picking up the dimension usage for the measures that are associated with those calculations, and it's automatically summing up the sales and the cost, and it's dividing by the sum of those two. This is classic OLAP right here. Now that concludes this demo. Now there's still a long way to go with analysis services. We have scratched the proverbial surface of the surface, but we've also seen enough here to get an idea of what OLAP can do. Now, by the way, I could have dragged other things into here. Up in the dimension slicer, the equivalent of a filter, I could have gone to the order date, and I could have said, you know what, I want to run this for the calendar year of 2007, and watch the numbers go down here at the bottom as a result, down to about 1 million instead of 4 million for mountain bikes. Okay, so that takes care of this demo. Hope everybody has an idea now of what OLAP can do, and in next set of exercises that we'll have with analysis services later on down the line, we'll start to fill in the gap with what these other critical options are.